Now we talk about poetry. Poetry or poem is a form of literary work that comes from the results of a feeling expressed by the poet in language that uses rhythm, rhyme, dimension, stanza, and arrangement of lyrics that contain meaning. The poem also contains an expression of the feeling and thoughts of the poet who uses his imagination. He concentrated on composing poem with the power of language, both lexically and emotionally. A poem usually prioritizes the sound, form, and meaning to be conveyed. The beauty of poetry becomes an aesthetic quality. There are general characteristics of poem. Poem has regular rhymes or rhythm because it is more aesthetic in deliverance. Poem is connotative because it is in direct deliverance. Poem is symmetrical because form is also important in poem. Poem consists of lines. You need to remember that. The language used by poem is denser than prose and drama because it has more emotion in it than the two. Those construct the outer and inner poetic elements of a poem. Talking about elements, there are some elements of poem. It can be seen as follows. First, diction. Diction refers to dictation. Dictations are words that have been chosen by a poet to be included in his poetry. This is because the poem is a literary work that expresses a lot of meaningful things, but it uses just few words to represent it. Therefore, the choice of words in a poem is very important and also must be careful. Because the words entered into a poem must contain meaning which is harmonized with the tone or the emotion of the poet, rhythm, and sequence of the words. The second, imaging or image. The image is the arrangement of a word that expresses an experience from a poet that matches his sensory experience. The sensory experience can be in the form of hearing, visioning, or feeling. In an image itself, it is also divided into three parts, namely sound, sight, and touch. By using the image can make the readers as if they are hearing, seeing, and feeling what the poet has spoken or experienced. The third one, concrete words. The concrete word is a word that can make it possible to bring an imagination to be thoughts or feelings of a poet, including in the sense of sight, hearing, smell, feeling, and touch. Of course, those can indicate a situation of text and other forms. Fourth, language style. Language style is the use of language which then can cause many meanings. In poetry style, language refers to the use of figures of speech, such as metaphor, paradox, and so on. 5. Rhyme and rhythm. Rhyme and rhythm is an equation in the sound of a poem that is in the first, middle, or end of a poem. Therefore, it can cause a prominent rhythm effect on poetry, so that the listener of poetry can be carried over what is conveyed to the poem. There are poetic structures that are also important to note. First, theme. The theme in the structure of a poem is the content of meaning that will be conveyed from the poem, which is conveyed to the listener, whether it is in the words, tone lines, or in the whole poem. Every poem must have a theme behind it. Second, tone. The tone in the structure of a poem is a feeling conveyed by the poet, which is indeed concerned what is experienced by the poet who is conveyed through the poetic words. You cannot just put some words in the lines, but you must guarantee that those words represent the emotion of the feeling of the author or the poet. poet. The point is, tone is the feeling of the author. Third, purpose. The purpose of the structure of a poem is the poem must have a message or meaning to the listener. You must write something beautifully and meaningfully. Those are the poetic structures that you need to remember. Now talking about the last part of this video. Making a poem is actually not a difficult one. Remember that. Making a poem is exactly something that is easy because you have to follow your emotion and feeling. The difficult part is how to make your words are alive when it is read or spoken by someone or by yourself. Therefore, the real power is on the rhetorical process, on the way we can play the words in some good point to utter. Remember, a poem should be beautiful in words, but it should be meaningful in spoken point. Now I'm trying to give you the example of poem, and I will give you the way to read it for you. A poem written by Robert Frost, Fire and Ice. Listen it carefully and find out the meaning behind it. Fire and ice. Some say the world will end in fire, some say nice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great and would suffice. Reading a poem is not always in a boiling or high temper of speaking. If the poem is about nature, we need to feel it. If the poem is about anger or vengeance, we need to shout it. Sometimes we are always mistaken in judging that reading a poem should be like someone who reads declamation. We need to shout, no, we do not need to do that. We do not need to raise our words and intonation if it is not needed. Most readers of poem in Indonesia believe in that way, while they forget that style of reading a poem is always related to the context of the poem itself, because the meaning behind it should be spoken, should be said, should be uttered. Just try to feel it and say it. Like when you sing something, you cannot make it right if you do not make it or feel it right. That's all what I can say about the material or the matter of poetry. Hopefully you can understand about it. If you have any question, just leave it on the column of the comment. Of course, I will answer it if it is a very valuable question, and of course, you really want to ask it because you do not know it. Thank you.